With that, we'll listen to an exhortation entitled Growing in Virtues.
Good morning. I always like when you say my name. That I will miss that in a little bit. It always feels very personal. It's kind of weird for me. This is the second year in a row that I have been the one to exhort after Great Lakes. So I don't know if there's some type of interesting pattern with that, or apparently I did such a good job last year, kind of recapping the events, even though I was there for the weekend last year, and I was also there for the weekend this past year. But I did tune in online, and there were a couple of good notes, which I will kind of expand upon further in this talk. But kind of the important news, which is going on in the world right now, is obviously the FIFA World Cup. That is probably the most important thing in the world going on right now, and it's very common to have one of those games going on in my household. And a lot of times when you're watching these games, you kind of, what I like to do is I like to try and predict, what's going to happen. Oh, is this player going to make a certain run? Oh, is this player going to score? Oh, is the goalie going to make a save? What's going to happen to the outcome? And in watching enough of these games, some of the other people in the house, like Bess or Christopher, they're saying, oh, wow, you should really be a coach. Or, you should be an announcer. And me, being the very arrogant, self-confident person I am, agrees. And, if Team USA is looking for a coach next year or in the next 4 years, I'd be willing to step up. But in watching all this, and watching the professional level, and then seeing how Best plays, how Ode plays, how Arthur plays, how, any of maybe an amateur plays, is seeing the amount of growth that it takes to get from just beginning a new sport to being very top level. And in my youth, a lot of times you think, oh, they get older, so the older someone gets, the better they are, and that's just how it is. And it's not that simple, because it's from that growth, and it's what really inspires that growth, what makes all the training that goes into becoming a professional athlete. You have to wake up early, you have to do solo training, you have to do group training, you have to compete against other people at a same skill level, then you have to compete against people with a higher skill level. And there's so many next steps within that development and that growth that people have to do in regards to being a professional athlete. And the other thing that I would think as a child, in my infancy of youth, and a lot of the reason why I'm also thinking about this is, it was a recent birthday for me, and now I've been told I'm getting towards that old stage, old at the ripe old age of 28. And because of that, I'm older, so I am automatically expected to know more about the world. And that's kind of the mindset that I had when I was growing up. If you look at some of the older people here, like Mickey, Rosemary, these people just exude wisdom, which is absolutely true. Like, very wise people, Bruce and Joni, Trent and Sue, very wise people. But there's still a lot that it's not just the wisdom that they have, they're continuing to seek out wisdom as well. And they know that they don't have all the answers, but they are willing to go ahead and seek those answers. And it's that type of growth for everyone that has taken me 28 years to realize that it's not just once you get older, you know everything right away. It's that growth. And something which, when you're thinking about growth, you think about the saying, good people do good things. And it's this label of good. What defines good, especially in the spiritual sense? And there is kind of a simple formula for good, and it goes faith, good works, and there's something in between, and that in between part is virtue, or that transformed character. It's not enough to just believe and to do the good works, but you also have to have your moral compass change as well. So I want to turn quickly to James chapter 2, verse 26. So that is James chapter 2, verse 26. And this is part of a more well-known passage about faith and deeds, but for verse 26 specifically, it says, "As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead." So faith and deeds being the part that we like to focus on a lot. But the first part, as the body without the spirit. So it's not enough just to believe and just enough to do good works. Because if we're doing that empty-heartedly, then we're not really doing it at all. Our body needs to have that spirit, that virtue, that transformed character between us for why we do what we do. And looking specifically at faith versus virtue, and when you think about faith, think about inward reliance and the trusting in God that He will provide, and as a basis of our lives. Now, without faith, what are we doing here? There's no point. If we don't believe, then there's no point in being here. But virtue itself is not just on the inside, but it's also on the outward moral excellence, and it's reflection of God's character, and it's evidence of spiritual growth. Again, that transformed character of being able to show who God is and reflecting Him through us in our actions. And faith comes first in all this, where you establish that relationship with God, where you learn to fully trust in Him. But after faith, it comes virtue, where faith is being lived out and becoming visible in a person's characters and actions. And it's part of that virtue where you're able to form habits, where behavior itself is habit forming. And that's a big part of the character. If we're trying to do good things, we need to form good habits. And it's slightly different than works, because works itself is doing the deeds, but it's, again, the reasoning behind why we're doing it. Are we doing it just because we're told to, or are we doing it because we believe and know that this is the right thing to be done? And so breaking up kind of the spiritual growth journey, as someone that has no experience with gardening, I want to relate this to a garden, especially with planting a flower. So you start off with a little seed. And this seed, when you dig it into the ground, this is where you just start to learn about the truth. The beginning of faith, that journey. Think about the reason why some people can learn. Some people are kind of born into it. I was raised a Christadelphian. I was here my whole life, brought up to church. You have some people which found it later on in life, through some way or another. Maybe they were at a different church and then they had some type of issue, what's not, and now they came over here. Think about some of the journeys from overseas and having some type of asylum through the church and being that brought over here. Everyone's got a different journey to start, but it all begins with that faith and choosing to believe. Next, I want to turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 5 to 7. So that is 1 Corinthians chapter 3, starting at verse 5. This is Paul speaking. "What, after all, is Apollos? And what is Paul? Only servants through whom you came to believe, as the Lord has assigned to each his task. I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow." here's a very direct passage about growth, and especially with gardening and with planting. So Paul is that kind of beginning of the faith journey for the church of Corinth. Then you have Apollos, who was another spiritual leader who was beginning to expand upon that. But God is the one that's able to make it grow. Because humans can only do so much, but it's through God and beginning to get that moral character, that virtue, able to grow. And another misconception that I had growing up is you think about the idea of baptism. And growing up, it was once I get baptized, I'm a perfect human being and I will no longer sin. And it's, black and white. And so when I'm thinking about that, I think I got baptized at 15 or 16. And that's a long time for the rest of my life to go without sin. But that's not the case. It's not as simple as, as soon as you dip under the water, that, your journey is complete. Rather, like the seed that just got planted, it's the beginning of the journey, of that commitment. It's not flipping a switch immediately to become perfect. There's no shortcuts in planting and gardening, at least none that I'm aware of. You have to do the work, and it's patience and a lot of practice. That comes to the second part of nurturing the seed and making it grow. So once you have the seed planted in, you have to do certain things to it. And again, I am not a gardener, but Bess, who's been living with me, he has been working on the garden, taking over from my mom. And, I looked out yesterday, looked out this morning, and I see a bunch of really tall plants. And I saw from when they had just started, and, starting off as very small seeds, and now they are really tall. Still no fruit on them yet, but they are growing. And half the time, I have no clue what he's doing. All I know is that he's doing some type of watering, and that's all I know. I'm not a gardener. But it's the nurture of the essence of feeding these plants to making them grow. What is it that really gets this growth? And you think about something for like rules in the code of conduct, like having a guideline of what we need to follow in order to grow. And one of the classes at Great Lakes on the Sunday was talking about dealing with cultural bias. And in essence, it was talking about a different way of thinking and not necessarily following some of the rules. Think about some of the rules that we've changed here in the past couple of years and changing up the service order. Before we would have the prayers and announcements right after the first hymn. Now we just do the prayers, we do announcements at the end. Kind of adjusting, not following a certain pattern of growth, a certain rule. For the emblems, at first we used to pass out the bread, say a prayer, then pass out the wine. Now we do it all together. It's small things that have a difference of biblical basis. And the brother that was giving the talk on Sunday talked about praying with your eyes open, which was emphasized by the prayer before that with Brian Ross praying with his eyes open, and having it being a biblical instruction of, does it say to pray with your eyes closed? Or in some cases to say that Jesus looked to the heavens and prayed. Instead of bowing your head and closing your eyes, you look up and pray. Different types of these rules that we are so used to following as not being the basis for spiritual growth, but as a helpful guideline. Another key part is cultivating these daily habits. One of my other favorite classes that I tune into on Wednesday, which we actually have a couple people here on Wednesday night, the forum, about labor not in the Lord. So we had a curator and then 2 participants right here. And it was specifically talking about getting habits at work that are leading towards, Christianity, conversations that can lead towards God, what can be done versus not. I thought that was very powerful thinking about ways in your daily life which are you wouldn't normally think about spiritual growth, but opportunities to be able to find that growth. It was a very, very interesting discussion, and a lot of good questions that came out of it too. So I would recommend rewatching that if you have not already. But it's these daily habits, this repetition, especially in an environment which you normally wouldn't be able to cultivate this spiritual growth, this virtue for your character. Think about opportunities where you can, where it is by yourself. Think about prayer, being able to pray whenever we have the opportunity to pray whenever we want, even if we're driving. Don't necessarily have to bow our head and close our eyes, but we can still pray while on the road. Being able to have individual Bible study. Back when I was in college, one of the things that I think helped me the most was just reading one chapter a night, one chapter a day, and going through the whole Bible. And it takes a lot of time, but it's forming these good habits of reading, understanding, learning, and being able to help others learn as well. And surrounding yourselves with like-minded individuals, especially, again, going back to that forum, in a work environment, there are some people which you kind of have to deal with, but there are also some people that you can surround yourself at work which will uplift you rather than try and tear you down. And it's that mindset of working in a positive environment to cultivate that growth. And especially for me, I've moved around departments enough time at work. I'm on my 11th department now, which is a record, so it's being Nathan now. So I moved a couple months ago at this point, and as much each time when I move, it's you want to take this shortcut to growth. But again, there is no shortcut to growth. You have to take time. You have to learn each new system. It takes a lot of patience, focusing on one task at a time. If you try and do everything all together to get this growth, it's not going to work. You have to focus in and zero in on one specific aspect. So the Bible also has some virtues that it wants us to look into. So I want to turn next to 2 Peter chapter 1. So 2 Peter chapter 1, going from verses 5 to 8. And this is a good list for some of our virtues that we want to have. For this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and to goodness knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, and to self-control perseverance, and to perseverance godliness, and to godliness mutual affection, and to mutual affection love. For if you possess these qualities in increasing measure, they will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. So it's a great list here, speaking about these attributes that we want to have for ourselves to get this growth, to continue to grow spiritually, and to increase our moral character, moral compass, this virtue that, again, we want to, as we're watering the plants, that this is stuff that we need to feed into ourselves in order to let that seed grow. Think about the very start with faith. We want to add to our faith. This is, again, the seed being planted where you're starting to learn the truth and believe. And you think about goodness, which in some translations also translates to virtue, which is that change in moral character. These are the two setting the table for the rest of these attributes. After goodness, we want knowledge. This is where you're actively wanting to learn the scripture, where you want to learn more, you want to grow, no matter where you're at in your life. After knowledge, self-control. Having discipline in our daily habits, where we're able to focus and choose to focus in on God. rather than all the distractions around us. Being able to control ourselves from all these wayward distractions. After self-control, there's perseverance. That's being steadfast throughout all things. Perseverance is very similar to patience, and having patience to deal with these struggles that we're going to encounter during our growth. With the seed going up, I think about yesterday with all the floods. That's a lot of water that comes down, and you can start to panic a little bit about, are the plants going to be okay? You need to have perseverance and continue to endure and be steadfast and trust that's going to work out. After perseverance, godliness. And this is a key one for us, where we're trying to live our life as a reflection of Christ. And it's this big step of, you have the knowledge, you have the want to learn more. You're able to endure wanting to learn more. Next, it's actually living our lives with godliness as a reflection of Christ. And after godliness, we have mutual affection, showing kindness to those around. Kind of emphasizes that godliness. As Christ was kind to everyone around him, we too should be kind to all those around us as well. And to lift each other up rather than tear each other down. And after mutual affection, love. Demonstrating compassion and consideration for others, absolving of all reason, unconditional love for others, to get this final growth piece. And it's this growth that these attributes help us with, to become the best version of ourselves in order to share it with others. Because if we want to truly grow, it's not enough just to be a plant and to grow, but what comes next is to bear fruit for others. And just like a full-grown tree, it still gets to grow. It still gets to continue to grow, but there's also plants from it. In our garden, Bess is planting tomatoes and peppers. And, the plants continue to grow, but you can see some of the vegetables there. You can see the tomatoes coming out. And, you take one tomato, you wait another couple of days, another tomato is ready to go, and it keeps on producing more fruit while still continuing to grow. So I'm going to turn back to our passage from the opening back in Titus. So in Titus 2, verses 7 and 8. So within part Titus 2, starting at verse 7. And this is, again, Paul's instruction. In everything, set them an example by doing what is good. In your teaching, show integrity, seriousness, and soundness of speech that cannot be condemned, so that those who oppose you may be ashamed, because they have nothing bad to say about us. And there's a very similar instruction in 1 Timothy 6 through 16, which I won't go over, but it's very similar. But here, the instruction is to instruct and to teach. And it's the growth from becoming the student to now being a teacher. And how to do it? By showing them what is good. Showing integrity, seriousness, and soundness of speech. Being true with what you say. Being confident what you're saying is true. And giving about it in a serious tone. It's important news which is being shown. And the rest of what we read this morning from Titus 2, it's instructions for how to lead virtuous lives. That growth to become who we want to be. And once we're at a solid place, once this tree is starting to bloom, these fruits which are being bared and born for others, so that they may continue to plant a seed and to grow as well. You start with one tree, with one plant in the garden, and soon after, give it a couple of years, then you get another plant, then you get another one, And pretty soon the whole garden is full with virtuous trees continuously to bear fruit for others. And Jesus is also similar with this. And I want to turn to John 15, verse 4 through 5, where Jesus himself uses a very similar analogy. So in John 15, starting at verse 4 through 5, this is Jesus speaking. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. This is a powerful message when we think about our growth and growing in virtue. We are like these branches that are trying to reach out on our own to bear these fruit. But we need the vine itself to do so. We need Jesus in order to grow and to bear fruit for others. And it's through him that we are able to produce fruit, to continue to expand his teaching, his lesson for all those around. And you think back about, the whole analogy of growing a plant, thinking about all the things that need to go right for that one plant to grow. You need good soil. You need to have a seed that's ready to be fertilized and ready to grow, not something that's dead. You need consistent water. You need consistent sunlight, consistent nutrients being fed into that plant. And if you have all this, fruit will naturally emerge. It's a course of time where this growth and all the growth that comes from different aspects of life, all these external forces which are allowing for us to grow, but it's also this internal force, this desire for growth, this desire to be better is what we want to have. And once we have this growth, it's not enough just to keep it for ourselves, but like a good plant, we want to bear fruit for others so that they may grow as well. The journey is never done, no matter where we're at in our stage of life. There's always room for growth. And with that, we want to let our light shine for others. Once you have, if you have a standout tree or a standout plant in the garden, you want to let it shine and want to imitate how it got to be so good, so that way the rest of the garden can be as impressive as that one. You don't want just one really good thing in the rest of the garden kind of lacking. You want everything to be good from a good gardener. It's this cultivation that God is the greatest gardener of all time, able to cultivate each one of us to grow in faith, to grow in good works, but importantly, to grow in virtue, in this moral character, in wanting to get better, choosing to get better, and getting better for the right reasons, so that we may bear fruit for others. We want to be a reflection of God's character to the world. Be this reflection that God has set out for us. This growth that we have for ourselves. Think about the path that Jesus had when he's growing up. Did he know everything right away, or did it take him some time to go through the learning? And once he was learning, once you think that he knows enough, he still wants to learn, still wants to grow, still wants to develop. And it's his character, his virtue, which is continuing to grow through all this, to being the best version of himself that he is. And that's where we should strive to be at, to strive to be this reflection of Christ. When we think about his sacrifice, the highest sign of growth that he had for his character, of willing to die for all of us. Not because he has to, but choosing to do so. Knowing what's going to happen, but offering all of us salvation because of his decision that he's made. So I want to have one last passage to read from in conclusion in Matthew 5, verse 14 through 16. This is what we should strive to do on a continuous basis, to continue to grow, to continue to grow our virtue, our character. So Matthew 5, starting at verse 14. This is Jesus speaking. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven.